again to the Marketplace Conference for having us. Today, Cecilia and I could not be more excited to be spilling some tea on Gen Z with you. With this summer's Barbietopia inspiring us all to reflect on our own identities, values, and dreams, we at Redpoint began to wonder what shared truths might shape the world ahead and found ourselves continuing to come back to the role that the coming-of-age Gen Z will play in transforming the world as we know it. We were eager to get to know them, their habits, their priorities, their passions, their fears. From how they shop and save to what they want out of their families and careers, their beliefs were foundational in enabling us to form a better understanding of who they are and what future they're welcoming in. First, you might ask, who are we? And why does a millennial, like myself, have any right to pontificate on a generation not only more diverse and dynamic than my own, but arguably far more nuanced and complex in their beliefs? Well, allow us to, we got some slides, introduce ourselves. For those of you whom I haven't met, I'm Meera. I'm an early-stage investor at Redpoint, a Bay Area-based multi-stage fund who's had the privilege over the past 25 years of investing in a broad range of consumer, enterprise, and infrastructure businesses, ranging from Snowflake and Stripe to more recently Whatnot and Ramp. At Redpoint, I specifically orient around seed and Series A marketplaces, consumer apps, and software businesses, where I personally have a soft spot for businesses that are fostering a better future.
To open the water.
Oh, thanks.
Say hi.
Where I personally have an affinity for companies fostering a better future for our planet and for the people who comprise it. Over the past several months, my team at Redpoint has embarked on a truth-seeking journey in an effort to better understand the identities of the media's investors' favorite new generation, Gen Z. Today, we're excited to discuss many of our findings, which we will be publishing next Monday as part of our inaugural State of Gen Z report. With that, Cecilia, I'll let you introduce yourself, and we can get into the meat of things.
Great, thank you. Hey guys, Cecilia, really great to be here. I am a venture and growth investor at Kinnevik. For those who don't know, I always like to describe Kinnevik as a unique beast in that it's 80 years old, it's public listed, and it invests off its own balance sheet, so have a true form of permanent capital that backs companies from venture growth to IPO stage. But I guess the reason why I'm really here today is the fact I'm lucky enough to be Gen Z, and like many Gen Zs, I had a lot of side hustles, and one thing that did work out is the influencing part. So I've been building my social media presence since I was 18, and have kind of got 1 million followers in China, so kind of living that A and B life.
She's a big deal, is what she's saying.
So yeah, really glad to be here today. I mean, as we know, Gen Z is a very diverse population, so it would be very hard for me to be able to speak for all Gen Zers, but happy to just like offer my perspectives today.
I love it.
Yeah.
So before diving into what they care about, let's maybe spend a moment unpacking who exactly they are. Today, Gen Z is a growing influence across both culture and the economy. As this generation, ranging in age from 13 to 26, transitions into adulthood, they're transitioning into a phase where they are the ones really shaping the world as we know it. With close to $360 billion in spending power, they are clearly no small force. And as they establish themselves as the trendsetters and cultural carriers of tomorrow, I think we are all taking notice of what they have to say. Wanted to spend one moment on this slide because a lot of today's conversation is going to be based in some of our findings at Redpoint. Gen Z, as we know, is incredibly diverse, and so to give you a sense of who our data is representative of, wanted to flash this up so that you have a sense of who we are speaking for. Got a lot of pages. Okay, now to the good stuff. So while our survey unpacked topics ranging from educational interests to content, connections, and culture, today we will, unsurprisingly, be focused on the implications for the future of marketplaces because we are, of course, at the Marketplace Conference. To lay the groundwork, though, for what this future might look like, we'll begin today's discussion with an exploration of the why behind Gen Z's purchasing decisions, namely their economic angst. To Cecilia's point, while we often hear about the hustle culture of this generation, Gen Z really does thirst for all things green in more ways than one. And a lot of this does stem from their underlying anxiety surrounding their financial footing. in our survey, an alarming 65% of Gen Zs indicated that they worry about their future always or frequently. And while 59% of them specifically expressed a concern about the ability to afford the same lifestyle as their parents. So Cecilia, turning to you, what do you think has led to Gen Z's overwhelming anxiety when it comes to their finances?
It's a great question. I'm the youngest member of my family and also the most kind of financially conservative, the one who vetoes all the big investments and all the ventures my parents want to do. But taking a step back, I think the reality is that, as we all know, living costs, properties, prices have all gone up, but wages have not matched that. So there's a fundamental shift in kind of the reality of the macros. But what else hasn't changed is the social norms. So whether that's in the UK, in China, we still see kind of everyone wants to climb the property ladder. And so there's a real need of expectation, but you just can't really meet that. And so the generations before you who set up this playbook in how to kind of build their adulthood, you can't follow that anymore, right? And then I think the second piece is that they don't receive enough financial literacy education. And so they have all these hopes and dreams, but end of the day, they're just trying to make ends meet a lot of times. And then in addition to that, we are a generation that grew up with social media. And as we know, social media doesn't always portray reality. And so you're often being told this is the unsustainable but amazing life you should be living. And so with all of these kind of pressure, whether it's social norms, etc., that's not being changed, still very high, the reality has fundamentally changed for us. So naturally, we are pretty anxious in that way.
I feel for you.
Yeah.
I guess as it comes to addressing this angst, it does at least seem like Gen Z is taking a little bit more of a proactive step to get their finances in order. Based on our survey, 70% of respondents indicated that in the past 12 months, we've gotten some flashing lights, have indicated that in the past 12 months they've taken proactive steps to save more and spend less. So I guess as they sort of think about this as not only the first step in capital preservation, but also capital accumulation, how do you think Gen Zs are really thinking about kind of investing on the back of that? They've obviously seen, right, this game stock this, meme stock that. Do they care, or are they focused on other things?
So I actually don't know that many Gen Zs that participate in the meme stocks or the Web3 era. If we actually end up have any money left that can be invested, I think the biggest change is that people don't like to use brokers anymore. They like to actively manage their own finances. So that's, investing kind of, whether it's passive index fund, etc. So I think that's probably one of the biggest change, being able to understand, learn about financial knowledge, and then make active decisions themselves.
Got it. I guess maybe shifting gears a bit in terms of, well, if this will click. Ooh. We might be having.
You can manually control it over there.
Do you all have recommendations? In the back of the room? Let's see. Can you manually progress forward the slide?
But maybe we can talk about the slides as we...
Yeah, I guess as we're pulling up the next slide, since I have them in front of me, curious to hear as we sort of think through how they allocate their capital. I think one thing we heard from them is, at the end of the day, the thing they're most focused on is actually funding their current lifestyle, for better or for worse. And so as you sort of think about this prioritization in our survey, that obviously is based on US Gen Zs, how do you think that differs kind of in Europe as well as in China?
Funding their own lifestyles.
Versus saving for retirement, saving for their family.
I think it's a bit of a misconception that Gen Zs only want short-term gratification. And I think it's very much hinted by what I said earlier, is that they are literally, if they want to save any money, it'd be very tough. They're just making ends meet, right? And if the fact that they are going to be excluded from the kind of property ownership ladder, then what else can they do? And so that becomes, I might as well just YOLO live my 20s in a good life and then worry about savings later. And I think that's a pretty common trend, both in the US and Europe. China is slightly more different because I think in general, people are quite conservative just because of the histories. And so there, I think, is more of a balanced approach. But I do think savings is pretty difficult for this generation, no matter your geographies.
Got it. I'm clicking around a bit. Oh, I can see it here. Let's see if we can get back on track. People are getting a little preview of the deck. Maybe while we're pulling up these slides, I think one thing, we've heard a lot about is Gen Z's working hard and potentially playing harder, but kind of this emphasis on work and, existing at a generation that is eager to exploit economic opportunity. Are you all able to, there we go. Existing as a generation that is eager to exploit economic opportunity wherever they can. A huge part of this, right, is the creator economy, and something that we hear again and again from them that they want to participate in. As you sort of think about the creator economy, what does becoming a creator really mean to Gen Zs today? And are they kind of wading into this exploration, or are they kind of jumping off all in a way that was different than maybe 2 to 3 years ago?
So if you asked me this question 3 years ago, I would have been like, everyone can be a creator. We all have our mobile phones, just film yourself, and then we go from there. And you never know, virality will just kick in. It's what happened to me. Like, I remember I had COVID, and I was in a Chinese hospital, and I documented that whilst I was doing finals for uni, and I grew to 300K followers within 2 months. So that was like nothing planned, and you just wanted to document. That is not the case today. Today, I would have been like, you have to be incredibly tactical because it's a Red Sea. You have creators in every single vertical you can think about. And so you have to be very deliberate in kind of not just thinking what could go big, but also how can you monetize. So what are the brands that's actually spending the most amount of money that's potentially giving out ad sponsorships? Or if potentially you want to build a business on top of your Gen Z creator identity, then what type of business do you want to build? So a lot more kind of, I think it's more about the industry maturing themselves as well. Yeah. So there's a lot more elements playing into that.
I guess as you think about the industry maturing a little bit, I'm curious, in terms of like net new creators coming in, do you see them gravitating towards certain platforms versus others, whether that's TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, wherever else?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I'm only a creator in China, and as you probably know, China's ecosystem is actually quite isolated to the West. So even though ByteDance owns TikTok, but they also have another version called Douyin, which is identically the same, but everything's only in Chinese. And so from that angle, I think you're starting to see a segmentation in that different platforms represent different demographics, different purchasing power, and so people start to gravitate to the platform they resonate the most with. So even though TikTok, where I actually grew to 500K followers within 3 to 5 months, I actually lost 10,000 from then on, and it's been 3 years. And that's because I really struggle to use like these dancey, funny videos to resonate with the audience. And where I actually scaled very quickly over the last year is a platform called Little Red Book. And so think of that as a mix of Pinterest and Instagram, and it's kind of a review economy app. And majority of the customer base is actually female, educated, tier 1, tier 2 cities, and I just felt so much more resonation with them and ability to both monetize but also grow scale on there. So I think there's more of a trend because there's more media platforms existing. You can probably find one that there's, I guess, creator market fits on the platform.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I guess maybe double clicking on China, but taking a step back from the creator angle. A lot of the data on the screen, right, is very US centric. So I'm curious, as you sort of think about employment opportunities in China and kind of where Gen Z is gravitating towards there, what does that look like, just given where particularly kind of the youth unemployment rates are today?
Yes, so I think it's the stats you shared with me, right? Youth unemployment in China today is 20%, which is very, very high. And creator used to be this kind of fancy amazing job that people wanted to do because you have really unseen economics, and anyone could potentially be a creator. But now, so that's seen as an upside historically, whereas today a lot of people actually use it as a downside protection. So in case I can't find a job, in case I get fired, at least I have this to hedge. And so it's really turned into that as a result. And so I think actually if you did this survey about would you consider becoming a full-time creator in China, the rates would be even higher.
Got it. Well, it's taking us on a tour, so I guess we can transition to the next section.
Great.
Shifting gears a bit, I'd love to maybe spend some time talking about where Gen Z really spends their time so that we can better understand kind of where we can reach them. In the US, I think we found that they spend quite a bit of time online. 60% of Gen Zs in our survey are spending 3 or more hours a day online, and that's just the time they're spending with their friends. And so in my mind, first I'm asking, when do they do their homework? But I'm also asking, what are they doing there? Because what we're actually seeing is, some of these creators, right, are posting multiple times a day. A broad base of the population is posting weekly, monthly, or not even at all. And so really transitioning perhaps to the corners or to more private channels kind of on these social networks. So I guess one thing I'd be curious to understand is kind of as it relates to what's going on behind the scenes and these friendships that are being built. We found in our survey that roughly 1 in 3 Gen Zers have a close friend that they've never met in person, and that almost a quarter of Gen Z actually trust individuals online more than the people they encounter in person, which genuinely boggles my mind. I'm curious, why do you think this is the case?
Yeah. By the way, I don't think 3 hours a day on social media is that bad. I do this now. But yes, so why do they have close friends that they've actually never met and very long distance? So I think the trust layer, I don't think that's just Gen Z. I'm pretty sure a lot of investors write checks without meeting the founders in real life, right? So I think the trust layer can be built in a virtual space or in real life. That's becoming more of a phenomenon for a lot of generations. I also think my mother always used to tell me you should hang out with people who are really smart at school because you are the closest, you will be your closest 5 friends. Yeah. Very Asian mom. But anyway, I think the issue is back in the days without the internet, right? So you feel related to people who are close to you, that they have the same worldviews to you. Whereas now, as you consume more content and be able to kind of express your identity or feel that sense of belonging to a community that could be potentially far away, and they don't have to be close by proximity. And so I think is that expression of identity and sense of belonging, allowing them to feel like I can build this trust layer across space, across digital space.
Yeah. I guess going back to the idea of identity and how they approach identity, I feel like, you look at our parents, right? And many of them have lived in the same house for 20 years or in the same town, neighborhood, what have you. And so that in many ways defines them. Gen Z, to your point, kind of living online, it's quite different because they can go anywhere, whenever they want. How do you think they therefore approach identity? Is it something they try on? Is it something that's constantly evolving? Or do you feel like as they get older, they are becoming a little bit more cemented in kind of their worldview?
I love the word identity. So I actually majored in geography at uni, and everyone used to think that means you're studying about volcanoes, etc. But it's a lot more fun than that. So my dissertation was actually on identity, which is basically is just your sense of belonging. Do you feel included or excluded to a society? And then, so the question is are their identities still fluid today, or do they feel already kind of cemented to who they are? And to be honest, I feel like a lot of people, I can't speak for the older generations, but everyone's constantly in a search of their true journey and who they really are. And especially now with internet connecting everyone, right? I think that is a still kind of fluid stage for them.
Got it. Transitioning to perhaps the most obvious slide, where they spend their time. We found, unsurprisingly, particularly when it comes to where they're sharing content from, TikTok really reigns supreme. And the other thing we found that was maybe surprising was how they really felt about it. 44% of Gen Zs in our survey told us that they have a somewhat healthy to very healthy relationship with social media. I think a bunch of therapists would probably tell us otherwise. But as we sort of think about a lot of these algorithms becoming more powerful, these platforms becoming more immersive, I think we can only assume that they are going to be spending an increasing amount of time, online than anywhere else. I guess as we sort of think about how they orient that time or what they're getting out of that time, I'm curious to hear how you think about kind of the growing divide between this idea of an interest graph and a social graph, and how this kind of influences where they spend maybe their content sharing time versus their connection time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. As much as I really care and want to stay connected with my friends, these kind of algo-based, user-generated kind of media platforms, so such as TikTok, it is just so much more entertaining. Like, they know my brain better than I do myself, right? They know exactly what I want to watch, what baby videos that really makes me cry during my lunch break. And so I think that will just be a very sustainable trend going forward. And then I think in terms of consumption versus kind of production, I think I posted a lot more, like I actually wanted to post a lot more often before I was an influencer on Instagram, because that's what everyone did. They shared about their life, whereas now, because you're constantly being fed such kind of high quality content all the time that keeps you engaged on the platform as a consumer, I think the motivation there to post is actually diminishing as a result of that.
Fascinating. Shifting gears a bit to play into everyone's favorite VC stereotype, would love to transition the conversation to the topic of AI, because it feels like it is coming up in increasingly every conversation as it relates to consumer. What's interesting is that feedback from our survey suggested that while Gen Z is by and large both incredibly excited and interested in kind of the role that AI will play in their social life, they're also quite terrified in the technology's human-like abilities. We've obviously seen or heard about the rapid growth of platforms like Character, for example, that have really accelerated some of this adoption. But as you sort of think about the applications, let's say for someone like yourself in a creator seat, how are you thinking about the role that AI will play and how you engage with your followers, create content, what platforms will even exist for creators?
Yeah. So again, I think taking a step back is very helpful here in terms of how I think about the creator tech stack. And then when I look at companies building this space, I like to segment them into kind of your three groups. One is the ones that 10 times your products. So that's either making you be able to make product much easier or just looks a lot more professional. Second group is probably 10 times saves your cost. So you don't need to hire a copywriter, you don't need to hire an editor, and someone can do it for you, in this case, AI. And then third is a kind of technology that can actually increase my distribution, whether that's allowing me to quickly translate my Chinese content onto YouTube through 11 Labs, or whether that's the kind of ability to have more one-to-one fan engagement in order to then increase my conversion on my post so I can charge more for my ad sponsorship. So those are the kind of three groups I think about. And one group that doesn't get me the most excited is definitely the 10 times product, because actually what you find is what goes viral tends to be the ones that's the most authentic, most down to earth. So 10 times in my product doesn't really cut it for me. But then what's really helpful, I think the holy grail is both kind of your 10 times your distribution, but then the second one is saving costs. And I was actually just meeting Jen from Passion Fruits yesterday, and she's basically building this like business in a box for creators. And so they're able to kind of help creators to manage their scheduling, kind of connect with brand sponsorships, and also smooth lines in all the kind of communication tools. So those are the two kind of criteria where I'm the most excited about.
Amazing. We'll want to be cognizant of time, so maybe shifting gears to the final chapter of today's conversation, the commerce considerations and really what this means for marketplaces specifically. So before hypothesizing on what Gen Z was looking for in their online and offline purchasing decisions, we figured we might as well just ask them. And perhaps unsurprisingly, given the economic angst that we've unpacked, we found that affordability, first and foremost, was really their top priority. Number two, followed by quality. So again, kind of coming back to this value for money component. However, what potentially surprised us was their lack of emphasis, at least in comparison, on elements like sustainability, minority ownership, kind of these ethically aligned considerations. While they told us elsewhere in our survey that these were movements that certainly mattered a lot to them, what we found is they weren't necessarily willing to pay that much for it. So just wanted to mention this as it's a topic we'll come back to in a moment. But first, let's talk about where they're getting their inspiration. Again, unsurprisingly, TikTok kind of reigns supreme, followed by friends and family. So creating this interesting kind of social graph, interest graph component. I guess with TikTok driving so much in terms of what's getting adopted and promoted by this generation, how are brands going about activating influencers like yourself, or even kind of planting the seeds for these aesthetics that seemingly take off on Instagram or take off on TikTok and then infiltrate kind of the streets, whether it's in London or San Francisco or wherever else?
Yeah, so I think there's actually kind of two types of brands. One that follows quite a traditional advertising route, which is either giving out free products, they call it seeding, and in the hope that the influencers would advertise it on their channel. The second is just ad sponsorships. And then you have the second type of brands who are, I call them digital native brands too. So the likes of Shein, Cider, who actually launched their own kind of platform and then be able to kind of gain millions of followers and then actually receive quite cheap acquisition costs as a result of that. And what I'm also really seeing is that a lot of like incumbent big brands, especially the case in China, are trying to create a brand personality. And so they actually put forward 2 to 3 live hosts that they want people to know. When they look at them, they think of the brand. And these live hosts are actually, I don't know what their selection criteria is, but it's something that's memorable. So there's a coconut milk brand in China that's been around for like many years, and their live commerce is full of these like 4 guys who are absolutely ripped and very tall, and they wear a tiny vest top and short shorts, and throughout all the live commerce session they are on a Peloton, probably not a real Peloton, but they're on a Peloton, and they're trying to sell you like coconut milk while cycling for like 6 hours straight. And you suddenly like actually think about them, you know who they are, you know what they stand for. So I think that's actually a really smart way to kind of bring that personality back to brands.
Yeah. My Instagram feed is literally all just celebrity dogs, so I'm wondering how I get these Peloton riding coconut milk.
You gotta be on Chinese social media.
I guess maybe double clicking on the live commerce component, you know, we asked our Gen Zs, where do you want to shop? Somewhat surprisingly, though perhaps not that surprisingly, in-person remains their preferred channel, though we've certainly seen e-commerce adoption kind of tick up in the wake of COVID and kind of remain steady thereafter. However, in the US, despite the success of a few breakouts like a Whatnot, live streaming is still a really small section of the market, and it's something that I feel like VCs talk so much about and just has really never taken off. So I'm curious, what do you think investors have gotten wrong about the disparity between Asia and kind of the rest of the world as it relates to adoption there?
Good question. I think it probably comes down to user adoption or user behavior, right? So one, I would say that Chinese consumers are very used to the concept of super apps. So that's where they entertain themselves, they purchase, they do their e-commerce behavior, they also chat to people. And so as a result, when you have kind of Douyin live stream, people are kind of familiar in that I can watch my favorite influencer live, but I can also purchase on the things that they're recommending to me live too. The second is that I actually try to help a few digital native brands who launched their markets in the UK to find live hosts. No one wants to live stream for 8 hours. I understand it's a lot of hard work. So there's also a bit of a supply issue there. And then I think finally in general, like shopping kind of in person, there's a real experience touch to that, right? And so people try to make kind of live commerce just as engaging. And also I would say that the infrastructure that exists today in China just makes kind of convenience, really convenient for you to do kind of live shopping, which I think they're a bit more advanced in that perspective.
Got it. I guess as we sort of think about the experience or kind of that personalization element, obviously a huge role that AI can play there. I know you spoke a bit about kind of the AI components that could make your life as a creator 10x better. Maybe taking it from a Gen Z consumer's perspective and the way that they shop, how do you think that the introduction of more AI applications will influence kind of where they shop or what they shop for?
It's already having a big impact on kind of fashion goods, right? So like Shein and Cider, they're very good at personalized recommendations. And I think going forward, you're probably going to see that transitioning from also services. So this is nothing like novel, but a lot of people are kind of betting on the fact that in the future, when you want to plan a travel, an AI chatbot just knows your budget, etc., and they will just plan it out for you. But I think a lot of Gen Zs actually still wants to be the decision maker. So they want some level of convenience, but they also want to have a say in this. And so I imagine it would be kind of, these are the short lists based on what you want, and then what do you actually want to do, and make you the decision maker too, but make your life easier.
Yeah. I guess as we sort of think about that whole idea of agency, what we found is that, yeah, a lot of these folks are shopping online, and as they sort of think about where the actual conversion happens, it is often kind of on these platforms. However, kind of taking a step back and thinking through, okay, I want this from TikTok, this from Instagram, this from YouTube, what have you, it begs the question of kind of cross-platform interoperability, whether it's all of these platforms knowing the same version of me, or me being able to compare and contrast and pair things across platforms. Kind of, what have you seen as it relates to kind of the magic of interoperability kind of across the ecosystem in China? And do you think that could work in Europe, the US, elsewhere, or no?
I actually think apps in China try not to cross-platform collaborate because everyone wants to own your time and they want to own your wallet. And so, like, WeChat started off as a one-on-one conversation platform, but now they have, their own knowhow, which is kind of your video platform that basically does the same as TikTok. And then they're kind of introducing, there's a lot of fintech solutions embedded in WeChat as well. And so I would probably argue that there's actually a lack of kind of cross-platform engagement as a result of that.
Got it. I guess as we sort of think through some of what you said, going back to your little Red Book comments on sharing reviews, sharing your perspectives, what we've heard from Gen Z is they really like sharing their own perspectives, but they also are quite curious to hear the perspectives of one another. Today, 3 in 4 Gen Zs are looking for a website that does provide these sort of authentic user-generated reviews. So can you maybe shed a little bit of light for us on where this obsession comes from? Is it altruism? Is it social signaling? Kind of, why are people sharing these reviews?
Yeah, I think in general, people love to understand what other people are using, right? Like, the kind of interpersonal trust really matters. But the issue is, whenever you actually see an influencer that's posting a video online about review of this product, you almost like second guess, are they being sponsored or not? Is this legit or not? And so there's like a real tendency to them actually wanting to go back to like, I just want the actual consumers, like real reviews, and hence you have these websites coming up. But then I would say Little Red Book actually solves that problem because it's actually like the new search engine in China. Whenever you think of a new restaurant you want to go to, a new skincare product you want to try, you would go on Little Red Book and they would just be flooded with actually like real people who have 100 followers or so, maybe 3 likes, but writing genuinely long reviews. And so that kind of flywheel is happening in China on Little Red Book.
Got it. Speaking of Chinese trends, Shein, and the love-hate relationship this generation has with fast fashion. It's interesting because I think going back to the comments surrounding them caring so much about the environment or these existential concerns, while they seemingly care, they don't care enough to stop shopping from these horrific platforms. A lot has come out, right, over the past 6 to 12 months as it relates to Shein's environmental practices, ethical practices, what have you. Do you think this creates an opportunity for new entrants, or do you think they're here for good, owning this space?
It definitely creates new opportunities, but I think what you had in a few slides above about affordability being important, that will always stay true. And so they want to have style in order to express their identity, but they also don't want to pay too much for it. And so I think it's more about over time, whether it's the likes of Shein and Cider that actually improve ESG in their supply chain, or there's going to be new entrants who are able to satisfy both.
Yeah. Tight on time, so we'll maybe transition here. I guess taking the other side of the fast fashion argument, this generation at least tells us that they care a lot about the brand values of these platforms when making a purchase. Roughly 1 in 2 Gen Zs told us that brand values were in fact very important to them, however they so define that. I guess for these platforms or brands, what do you think that means? Is that storytelling, brand marketing, actual practices, somewhere in between?
So I think a lot of brands have actually done active work on this, in that they have pledged to be net zero, they have pledged to recycle a lot of their textile waste, and there's also a lot of pressure, especially in the EU, to say that by 2025, for example, most countries need to have textile waste recycling infrastructure ready. So there's definitely kind of a real push and the urgency to do something, but the reality is that the technology there is just not mature yet. So I actually have looked at textile circularity as an investment theme from both kind of the downstream and upstream perspective. And in upstream, we're seeing really exciting companies in the kind of material recycling space. So for example, Circ, that's able to recycle kind of mixed fabrics. And then you have IFC in Finland, who can recycle kind of cotton. Then you have these kind of new materials companies like Vitrolab, that's like lab-grown leather, Gali lab-grown cotton. So like there are some really exciting technologies that's coming out, and brands like kind of H&M, Inditex, they're actually very active investors in this space as well, and so they're actually backed some of the companies I already listed earlier. So there is kind of actions in place, urgency in place, but the reality is also that none of these companies that I've just listed are going to be commercial for the next kind of 2 to 3 years. They're just completed their pilot stage and kind of launching their commercial scale. So I think we're more or less in a transitioning phase where a lot more capital resources need to be deployed here. And then over time, this is not just something that's like greenwashing branding. There would actually be viable stuff that's at a good economic cost.
Well, I love ending on an optimistic note. So with that, I believe we are up on time. But Cecilia, thank you. And thank you to the Marketplace team as well.
Thank you.